How's it going, everybody? Welcome into the Skyline Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Jack Hartman, joined as always by my good friend, my co-host from the West Coast, Nick Normand. Nick, how you doing today?
Doing well here down the stretch, Jack. Just rocking with my Iros gym shirt. It's kind of falling apart, but trying to work out, trying to get swole. Yeah, just enjoying my time though, Jack. Happy to be here on a frigid Santa Barbara, like 60-degree day. Frigid for us.
Lucky.
But yeah. Probably can't say the same thing for you, but enjoying it. Good morning. How are you doing today?
Yeah, doing well, doing well. It was 15 degrees here in Pennsylvania when I woke up this morning, so I would kill for a 60-degree Santa Barbara day. But no, doing well. We're doing a special episode talking college football because there's a lot of stuff happening. This weekend is the conference championship weekend, and there's some serious playoff implications based on what happens here. Also, we've got some head coaching things to discuss. We talked about it a few weeks ago and sort of gave our predictions as to what we thought would happen. Time to revisit some of these big spots and big hires that have happened. And yeah, we're excited that we get to talk again this week and talk some college ball this time. And so we're gonna get right into it, talking about some of these head coaching changes. And the first one that I want to talk about, we'll sort of work our way up, is Florida hiring Tulane head coach John Sumrall. He has been very successful at Tulane during his tenure there, consistently being a top 25 team or threatening to be a top 25 team, consistently playing in, high leverage bowl games, being a group of five team in the New Year's Six games, winning those games, not just playing in them. And so he has been hired to replace Billy Napier at Florida. Nick, what are your thoughts about this hire, just in general?
I like it. I think that Summerall, as far as a defensive mind, culture setter, physicality bringer, I think he knows how to build a team the right way, knows how to make for what makes a competitive football team. And I think, given the landscape of the sport right now and what coaches were available, what it looked like as far as the coaches that were going to move, that the position Florida was in, it obviously felt like a two-horse race with him and Lane Kiffin. Like, that's what it seemed like, that Lane Kiffin was deciding between Florida and LSU. But I think that Summerall potentially could see more success at Florida in certain ways than Lane Kiffin at LSU, even though it feels like LSU, bigger brand, can get better players. Lane Kiffin might be perceived as a better coach. I think that Summerall should be able to bring the floor up for this Florida team, should be able to establish really strong defense, ground and pound. I think that Summerall is a good hire considering the circumstances, and that I think it's an upgrade for him. I think Florida, you can get a bunch of good players that come out of Florida. So many good high school recruits come out of the state. I think
Mm-hmm.
that you're going to see probably John Summerall's most talented team he's ever had at any level, probably. And so I think it should be an awesome fit for them.
Yeah, I really like this hire. Like I said, left Tulane. Tulane, we'll talk about a little bit more later because they're playing in a conference championship game this weekend, um, with a college football playoff spot on the line. At least that's how it appears. Um, I think there are a lot of Florida fans that are really concerned about this hire, and they're concerned about this hire because their last head coach, Billy Napier, came from Louisiana. Now, here's the reason that I think Florida fans need to calm down, need to stop and actually trust John Summerall and what he's going to do. John Summerall said in his introductory press conference at Florida that he was not trying to poach any players that he had recruited to Tulane. Now, on one hand, that sounds very respectful by him doing that, doing well by Tulane. They've been really good to him, and so he wants to make sure that, they're taken care of. Again, he's not trying to poach everybody. On the other hand, though, John Summerall knows he's going to Florida in the SEC, no longer Tulane in the American Athletic Conference, which means one, it's a bigger brand, so he can get far better recruits than he was ever going to get at Tulane. And two, he needs to get far better recruits than he was ever going to get at Tulane. The reason I mention all of this is that Billy Napier did not see it that way. Billy Napier went and brought a lot of his recruiting class that he had at Louisiana that last year to Florida, and we sort of saw how that turned out. So I think John Summerall is very smart. I think he will get a very good coaching staff around him. Just earlier saw that they're hiring Georgia Tech's offensive coordinator to be his offensive coordinator. That's a really, really great hire. Georgia Tech has had a really, really great offense over the last few years, especially in the Haynes King era. So that's a really, really great get for Florida in terms of a assistant and an offensive coordinator there. I think John Summerall is really smart. I think he's going to put the wheels back on the bus in a good way. Florida is still a premier brand and a premier program in college football. And especially, like you talked about, the massive, massive gold mine that is recruiting in Florida. I think he's gonna do a really, really good job there. Of course, there are other brands, in the state, even Florida State and Miami. Those are also really big. There are other schools that recruit out of there and do get guys out of there. Like that does happen, but it would not surprise me if instead of people really seeing like Miami, then Florida State, and then Florida in terms of who recruits that state the best, that under John Summerall, Florida is going to move up, especially with the way Florida State has sort of turned down a little bit under Mike Norvell, and the way Miami always seems to sort of sputter to the finish line at the end of the season with Mario Cristobal.
Mhm. I have a question for you, Jack, as well about Summerall. Summerall obviously has done a great job at Tulane. He went to college though at Kentucky, and Kentucky was hiring a head coaching position. Do you think that Summerall turned down that Kentucky position just purely because he thinks Florida's the better job, can get better recruits, bigger brand? Or do you think that Kentucky didn't pursue him as much as they could have? What do you think's the reason that that marriage didn't happen, would you say?
Well, one, I think Summerall was a hot enough commodity that he knew he had before Kentucky fired Mark Stoops. He
Mhm,
was being looked at by Florida and by
mhm,
LSU.
mhm,
Even though Kentucky is still an SEC team, they
mhm,
are not on the same level as a Florida and an LSU. And so I think
mhm,
part of it was him knowing what he was worth, and knowing that he was worth better than that. I think
mhm,
also this is something that really like get does not get valued enough when we see these head coaching positions come open. Schools like Duke, North Carolina, Kentucky, Indiana, they are hard places to get actually good head football coach candidates
mhm,
because they're basketball schools.
mhm,
Like if the University of Kentucky has a good year in football, it's like, hey, that's a nice bonus. But in
mhm,
reality, they care about basketball. That's just
mhm,
sort of the way it goes, right?
mhm,
Um, it's the reason that Indiana had no success basically in their entire history
mhm,
before Kurt Signetti showed up. And he said, when asked about taking the job, he said, like, I asked them, do you actually care about having a good football program? Because if not, I don't want to be here. And they said, we know that there's more money in football where it's time for us to
mhm,
sort of get with the times there. And
mhm,
look what's happened there, right? So it's hard if you're a University of Kentucky to actually get a really big candidate, like a John Summerall, because he knows like I'm gonna be handcuffed, as opposed to Florida and LSU, that despite Florida winning the national championship last year, they're like, that's a bonus, we care about football. And LSU, of course, has never really had a good basketball program. So I think that's part of it. I
mhm,
also think, like, yeah, it just kind of happened too late in the game, Kentucky
mhm,
deciding to move on from Mark Stoops, meaning that they couldn't be in the ground floor to interview John Summerall. And John
mhm,
Summerall was already really far in the process with LSU and with Florida, that it didn't matter that it could be like the sentimental feelings and the sentimental value of going to Kentucky,
mhm,
because he was already like, listen, I know I've got one of these two jobs.
mhm. Right. So I feel like that opens up the door to, I feel like thinking down the line here in 2 or 3 years, if Summerall's tenure at Florida doesn't go well, and for some reason Florida's wanting to turn over, like we could see Kentucky and Florida turn over the same year again 2 or 3 years from now. Do you feel? I feel like Kentucky would make sense if Summerall was fired as a soft landing for him in that case years from now as a downgrade for him from
Sure.
Florida, but would make a lot of sense then. But that's presuming things go poorly at Florida, and I think Summerall should be successful at Florida. So we just
Yeah,
don't know.
definitely. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about LSU and let's talk and Lane Kiffin. So there's a few things that I feel like I just want to say to sort of preface this conversation. I think any opinion that you can have about Lane Kiffin right now is perfectly valid and real. I do. I think whether you think he is the villain, he's the bad guy, he gave up on his team, Ole Miss gave him that job, he had success there, they wanted him, and all of that, and he's a bad guy for leaving. Yeah, you're right. If you want to say what's Lane Kiffin supposed to do, this was like a job that was, like a career defining job that he wanted. He has every right to take it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. If you want to say, hey, it's not his fault that the calendar is the way that it is, and he had to get in there so that he could sign these recruits. Look at Penn State right now. They didn't have a head coach before the National Signing Day, and they only have 2 recruits in their class. What was he and what was LSU supposed to do? Yeah, you're absolutely right. If you want to say he should have told LSU, I want the job, but let me finish it here first, and they if they really wanted him, they would have waited. Yeah, all of that is. I feel like all of it is valid. And that said, where I sort of stand is there are things that were definitely sort of working against Lane Kiffin and LSU in terms of doing all of this and not looking like the bad guys. Like there are aspects of it, the calendar, that sort of thing that were like, listen, this was just if this was going to happen, they were going to look like bad guys, right? That said, he handled it with an immense amount of immaturity. He handled
Mm-hmm.
it with an immense amount of pettiness and basically just acting like a baby, right? Like he tweeted, like despite all of the players wanting me to coach the college football playoff, Ole Miss wouldn't let me. And 4 different players retweet that and say, yeah, you were in the room too. None of us wanted you there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're going to go and you're going to start spreading these lies. You're going to say this, you're going to say that. You're going to play the victim when Ole Miss was likely willing to give you all of the money that LSU wanted to give you. If you had just gone and negotiated that, they would have done it. And you decided to leave and plant yourself as the victim. And that's where I stand on the, soap opera that is Lane Kiffin to LSU.
Mm-hmm. I think that's completely fair. I think that I'm just going to touch on the calendar aspect of this. One, I think that for Lane Kiffin, blaming the calendar is ridiculous in that, Lane, you have a decision to make. You are an adult. You have not just these 2 options, you have several options. You could have gone to Florida. You have multiple options. You are an adult, though, who is in a contract that you are able to get out of and make a decision on where you want to coach. You have that autonomy. That decision that you make, there are consequences to our decisions. Like whether they're good or bad consequences, when you make a decision, you get everything that comes with that. That's the whole point of making the decision, that you're taking everything into account. I think that blaming the calendar is a little ridiculous when you're an adult making a decision, but that doesn't change the fact that the calendar is also poorly made, poorly scheduled, early signing period being a thing and forcing coaches to have to scramble to take these positions to be able to be hired by these schools, to be able to hop on these early recruits, I think is ridiculous. I think that the fact that you can poach coaches from teams that are still playing meaningful football games is ridiculous as far as the head coach to head coach position. In the NFL, it's kind of different that offensive or defensive coordinators can get hired away. But the thing is, then you'll see teams wait, like the Saints waiting to hire Kellen Moore from the Eagles, and you wait for Kellen Moore to finish the season. And the reason they're able to do that is, imagine if the New Orleans Saints were like, nah, free agency starting, like the draft is around the corner and we need to like start courting these dudes. The Saints would be scrambling and the Eagles' whole Super Bowl path would have been thrown off if Kellen Moore just wasn't there. It was a
Yeah.
whole mess. And so I do agree that the calendar is a mess. It's ridiculous that you have to be recruiting your own players, high school players, and players from other teams all at once, and your coaches can get hired away basically at any time from any position for any position. That's just ridiculous. But that doesn't change the fact that, as you said, Lane Kiffin handled this like a mess. It was 100% a mess.
Yeah, and I think the calendar thing, so the reason that National Signing Day is when it is because so this year it was Wednesday, December 3rd. By Wednesday, December 5th, you have to sign if you want to enroll early to be there for the spring semester. Obviously, there is a large benefit to that as the coach getting a guy there, for all of spring ball. And two, as a player getting there for spring ball so that you can show off your stuff and be with your coach learning that much sooner, right? Totally understand that. I think it's good that they changed the transfer window, right? It used to be transfer portal would have been open at this point. Maybe not open, but lots of players would have been entering already. And so when it opens, within the next few days, right? Um, you know, players would have already known where they were going, right? I think it's good that they changed that. The biggest issue we saw last year was Penn State backup quarterback Bo Pribula, who had to leave the team and enter the transfer portal in the middle of the college football playoff as Penn State was making a run, through the college football playoff. He had to leave because teams were signing their quarterbacks and he was going to have nowhere to go. And James Franklin said at the time he does not blame Pribula for doing that. It's just a bad formula, bad situation that they were in. But there's other things that we can totally change this, right? So right now, week 0, like that third weekend of August, make that week 1. Move it so that Thanksgiving weekend is conference championship weekend, which would mean that hypothetically, let me look at my calendar here, right? Okay, so that would mean that hypothetically this weekend could be the first round of the college football playoff, and you're able to get through it to the point that on New Year's Day you're having the national championship, right? Which is the best time to get people to watch instead of the stupid Monday night thing, right? I never watched the college football national championship as a kid because you know why? It started at 8:30 p.m. on a Monday night. I had to go to bed. My bedtime was 9, right? That's how that works, So there's so many better things that you can do that way. Right now, the transfer window or the transfer portal is going to open on the 3rd of December. Okay, you change it so that the rules about signing to be able to get to campus for the spring semester just turn into with all colleges, right? If you're able to pay your deposit and get there before the semester starts, you can be there, right? You change that to that way. That, more or less fixes almost everything. It doesn't actually fix everything, but it puts us in a much better situation, right? So that we can handle things better. Again, not absolving Lane Kiffin of anything, because he could have handled all of it with much better, with much more class. Not lying, not making stuff up. The bogus that he's claiming he doesn't even know what his contract is. I refuse to believe that. That's just so dumb, right? So, yeah.
Right. So Lane Kiffin's now at LSU. And I actually have a take that I'm curious your opinion on. My take being more specifically about LSU than Lane Kiffin, because we already know who Lane Kiffin is. He's all over the place. He's a mess. He exits poorly. We know who Lane Kiffin is. What LSU is, I think LSU is the Philadelphia Eagles. Win championships with multiple coaches, have diva receivers who are causing problems. Your coaches aren't necessarily the guys in the driver's seat who are the reason for the success. But then you have an all-time great coach, Andy Reid, who succeeds more with the Chiefs. You have an all-time great coach in Saban who succeeds more with Alabama, but they also do a bunch of winning there at those stops with LSU and the Eagles. And I think that they both just have messes happening all the time there where the head coaches get fired all the time. Brian Kelly getting fired, Les Miles leaving, Ed Orgeron, it being a mess late there. Eagles with Sirianni and Peterson before that, and Chip Kelly before that. Like, you have a bunch of messes with those head coaches. And I think both of the teams are way more player talent oriented than actually like scheme. Where I feel like when I think of the Eagles, I think of look at all that talent, look at all those players they have. And with LSU, it feels like, man, look at all that talent they're able to conglomerate into an amazing team because of the talent. So I feel like this LSU program is a Philadelphia Eagles program that's very volatile but has a very high ceiling. The Eagles, obviously, at the top, I feel like are better managed because their ownership and GM are amazing. But that, to me, is the equivalent of the elite recruits that you're able to get at LSU. So that's my take, that I feel like Eagles and LSU are kind of a mesh at the different levels there.
Yeah, I can't think of anybody off the top of my head right now that I think would make more sense. So yeah, I'll give you that. That's good. All right. Virginia Tech hires James Franklin. That was I felt very proud of sort of seeing that coming and making that prediction. James Franklin was fired by Penn State, who we will talk about when we're done talking about James Franklin. James Franklin comes in and gets the 23rd ranked recruiting class for the class of 2026 in the country at Virginia Tech. This was something that I said this is going to happen. He's going to recruit the DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia. He already recruits it well. Now imagine he's able to recruit it and say you get to stay within driving distance of home. That's what he did. He went when he went to Blacksburg, Virginia, and he's been doing great. Stole a lot of recruits, a lot of Penn State recruits, but not just Penn State recruits. One of the things that he said, and I have reason to believe this, is like we didn't go and choose specific schools that we were going to try to flip their commitments from. We just went after the guys that we had relationships with from recruiting at our prior place, and that was a lot of Penn State guys. And they were a lot of Penn State guys who were from Virginia because, again, he's great at recruiting there. And so, in doing so, he's able to get these guys to flip. A lot of them from Penn State. He got a 3-star recruit flipped from Syracuse. Like this is what he does. It would not surprise me, and I think this is actually a safer bet than everyone that was talking about North Carolina making the college football playoff this year with Bill Belichick. I actually think that Virginia Tech could win the ACC next year and make the college football playoff with James Franklin, because I do think so, because of the status that the ACC is in right now, because of the schedule that he's going to have next year. The Virginia Tech with James Franklin in year one is going to be similar to Syracuse with Fran Brown in year one, in that you have a new coach stepping in and also happens to have a pretty reasonable schedule. And so, I see that happening. And I think it can happen. I really do, especially because he has a proven track record of being a really good head coach. Like, let's think about it this way. How many Big Ten championships does James Franklin win if Ohio State and Michigan are not in the Big Ten? Right? Again, they were. He had to play them. He was not successful against them at Penn State. Sure. There is not an Ohio State or a Michigan in the ACC. Miami, Florida State, Clemson, good teams. They're not consistently starting off the season ranked in the top 4 of college football and never leaving there the whole season like Ohio State. They're not consistently competing for a Big Ten championship every year like Michigan has been over basically during James Franklin's tenure at Penn State. I think it can happen. I think he's going to have a lot of success there. And so I this is just such a home run hire, if you ask me.
Yeah, I think it's a great hire too. I think it was an awesome shout out for you when you called this a month or two ago. At this point, it's been a long while. I think James Franklin right now is in an awesome spot that he's able to just focus on recruiting, especially recruiting the DMV, like you were saying. But just being able to lock in on just getting players, acquiring talent, that to me has always been his strong suit, where he's always able to get freak athletes, awesome players who he's able to just get in there and not necessarily develop them to the highest level. Like he can develop players, but he can also get really high end recruits and just have a bunch of players immediately, like you're saying. My issue with what you're talking about as far as year one winning the ACC and going to the college football playoffs is, do we think that the issue with James Franklin is winning against good teams or winning big games? Because to me, I feel like they're kind of synonymous. It has great teams, but they also have big games in the championship where you're playing the championship against Ohio State, against Michigan. Those are great teams, but those are also big games. In the ACC, to be able to make the playoffs, basically the narrow path is winning the ACC for the most part, unless you're like a Miami this year and with the weird scheduling kind of stuff with the ACC of Miami not being in the ACC championship. I feel like the path for ACC teams is a little thinner. And I'm curious if the main path for Virginia Tech with James Franklin is the ACC championship, if we trust him in a championship game, although it might not be against a great team, it is still a big game. And do we feel like it's a big game issue for him? I'm curious where your thoughts are with that.
So here's why I don't think it's a big game thing. In
Okay.
2016, in 2016 they won the Big 10 championship. They
Mm-hmm.
won the Big 10 championship. They played against Wisconsin, and they won the Big 10 championship. Last year, they won 2 college football playoff games. They beat SMU at home, and then they beat Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl, I believe. Those were big games. And honestly, I think those all three of those big games, right, that I just mentioned, the opponents that they faced are inferior opponents to the Ohio State and Michigans that he had to play against every single year. But because of that, I think it's reasonable. Like I think it's not a big game issue. I think it's a great team issue,
Gotcha.
you
Yeah.
know. And so I'm looking at that said, their schedule, I'm looking at it, or I'm looking at their opponents for next year. It's not as
Mm-hmm.
easy as I first thought. Okay, so they have to play James Madison at home. We're going to talk
Mm-hmm.
about James Madison later. They're going to be competing potentially for a college football playoff spot this weekend. They have to play Virginia, who is also competing for a college football playoff spot right now.
Mm-hmm.
They have to go to Clemson and to Miami. Clemson, who knows what Clemson's going to look like?
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to give Dabo the benefit of the doubt, but
Mm-hmm.
it looked really bad this year, right? So like, you don't know. Um, at Miami, if that's in November, I like Virginia Tech's chances because that's when Miami kind of falls apart.
Mm-hmm.
They also play Georgia Tech at home, but that'll be Georgia Tech without Haynes King because Haynes King is done. So there are some challenges on the schedule for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I don't think any of those that I just said is the same level of playing Michigan and Ohio State every year.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say he loses 2 of those games and wins everything else. That's still a
Mm-hmm.
10-2 record that
Mm-hmm.
at least gets you in the conversation, right? Miami is showing you that as an ACC team going 10-2 and not
Mm-hmm.
competing in the ACC championship gets you in the conversation. So, I do like I guess let me put it this way. I think if you had to place a bet right now of Virginia Tech to make the 2026 college football playoff,
Mm-hmm.
um, if you placed it, the safer bet is to place it that they will not, but
Mm-hmm.
the bet that's more likely to pay out more is to place that they will because there is a chance that would happen.
Mm-hmm. For sure. But then this year, like losing to Northwestern and UCLA, you wouldn't think a James Franklin team would lose those games, but they did. And so I feel like just to check off, being like, if they just lose that one and win the rest of the other 10, it's like they just lost to a bad UCLA team and a not
Sure.
great Northwestern team. So I feel like with him where he's at, even though he's been very consistent his entire tenure, This year has been different, and he had a really talented team this year. He had great running backs and a quarterback who he got injured, but he was playing at a high level last year into this year for a stretch. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. I mean, I think Drew Aller's a very bad quarterback. So, and I think the numbers make that case as well.
not for
But
college football, for NFL, sure, but like he played well last year, especially in the playoffs. He was bad in that last game, but
this year, I'm pretty sure before he got hurt, he was like 116th in college football in passer rating.
damn.
Like, that's really bad. So anyway, all right. Let's talk about Penn State here. Pete Thamel reporting within the last hour that Penn State has finalized a deal to make Matt Campbell, Iowa State head coach, their new head coach. Um, let me I'm let me just say this. Penn State is beyond lucky and blessed that they were able to get Matt Campbell. And here's why. I'm gonna list you a bunch of coaches that were linked at one point as guys that Penn State was interested in, that instead of taking the job, used Penn State being interested in them to leverage getting more money from where they were at instead. Matt Rule at Nebraska. He leveraged it into getting an extension with Nebraska. Mike Elko at A&M leveraged the Penn State job to get an extension at A&M. Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri leveraged the Penn State job to get an extension. Kalani Sitake at BYU leveraged the Penn State job to get an extension. Kurt Signetti at Indiana leveraged the Penn State job to get an extension. And Clark Lee at Vanderbilt leveraged the Penn State job to get an extension. On top of that, there are guys like Marcus Freeman who they reached out to that was not interested. There were reports that they were banking on Alabama losing the Iron Bowl to then be able to pressure Kalen DeBoer to leave Alabama to come to Penn State. Okay. The fact that Matt Campbell did not use this to leverage more money and an extension from Iowa State is Penn State has to thank their lucky stars. The way they have handled this situation has been horrendous all this whole time. You do the thing that we were told is that Penn State fired James Franklin when they did so they could get a jump start on the coaching candidates, and hiring their next head coach. If you are Penn State University, you should not ever be firing your head football coach without having other candidates in mind that you've already spoken to that would be interested in the job. Okay? Great example of this. I'm not going to use a specific school or a specific name of a head coach, but I have it from personal conversations. There was a head coach who got hired this cycle who was being communicated with by a different school, a Power Five school that had not even fired their head coach and has chosen to keep their current head coach for the next season. This school reached out to this head coach, this recently hired head coach with and his people, his agent, to set up some conversations, telling him, "We're pretty sure that we know you're going to go here. Don't sign anything yet. We want to talk to you." Okay? That happened. Meanwhile, Penn State fires James Franklin, then starts having communications with all of these head coaches. All of these head coaches, one, choose not to take the Penn State job. Like, I'm sorry, but Penn State is a more prestigious job than Nebraska. Penn State is a more prestigious job than Missouri. Penn State is a more prestigious job than BYU, than Indiana, though Aggie fans would refuse to believe it, than A&M, and then Vanderbilt. Like, but it didn't work. Like, it wasn't good enough because you fired James Franklin with all the success that he's had. No one wanted to do it, right? So the fact that Penn State was able to hire Matt Campbell is a massive win for them. There are other guys. Bob Chesney, he was the head coach at James Madison. He said no and took the UCLA job instead. Like, Penn State is beyond like Matt Campbell is a great head coach. He is a great recruiter. Penn State is going to have a lot of success with Matt Campbell, and it makes me sick because they don't deserve it with the way they handled this whole process.
I So where do you think the broken link was in this whole process with Penn State? Because for me, I feel like it can come down to a couple things. What they reached out to, what it seems like was everybody, just anybody who they think would be a great candidate. Do you think it was primarily them overvaluing the brand that was Penn State, overvaluing the talent acquisition as far as like how good of a team they have or could have with the recruits Penn State's able to get? Do you think it could be a money issue? Do you think it could be that like they thought some of these coaches were a little more desperate to get out? Because I feel like hearing the rumors of like a Kalen DeBoer losing the Iron Bowl, I feel like Penn State a little bit was banking on, hey, Kalen DeBoer has all this pressure being the head coach of Alabama, and all that pressure is going to want to cause him to move. Do you feel like it's overestimating that, overestimating their brand? What do you think was the cause of them being put in this situation where they're lucky to get Matt Campbell, but they're already behind the eight ball here with everything that's happened with the recruits that are already leaving?
Honestly, I think that Penn State just went into all of this thinking that they had the upper hand, that basically anyone that they connected with, that they showed interest with, would be grateful that Penn State would consider them for the job. In reality, that's not the case. That's not the case, right? Like, and part of it might be because they value themselves too high, right? Like in
Right.
2016, Penn State won the Big Ten. I'm pretty
Mhm.
sure that is the only time that they've won the Big Ten. That's not true. That's not true. They've won the Big Ten before. But since 2010, since 2010, I think that's the only time that they have won the Big Ten because they have to compete against Ohio State every year and they aren't successful because they don't bring in good enough talent compared to Ohio State. They don't they don't punch up the way that they're supposed to. And that's not just a James Franklin thing. That's been the case before James Franklin when it was Bill O'Brien. Like, that's just been the case at Penn State. And so you look at say, you like thinking about the SEC, right? Thinking about like, oh, well, LSU is the little brother to Alabama. Guess what? LSU still wins every now and again. Penn State's the little brother to Ohio State, but it's like Penn State's the toddler brother to the high school student that is Ohio State. There's never a time that you're actually overtaking them. There's never a time that you're beating them. And so like I think they just think that their brand is that powerful. Like you mentioned, I think they think that. I think they thought like they're going to have the upper hand in all of this. Like, like don't get me wrong, I think that Penn State, in theory, is a better job than basically all of these jobs that I mentioned, the head coaches that they connected with. However, Penn State is not that much good of a job that you're going to have a guy like Clark Lee at Vanderbilt who's been there for a few years, who's finally built this thing up, who's established it to be good, really enjoys it there, has great support from the administration and from the athletics department. He's not gonna give all that up to go to Penn State, which clearly the head coach is not supported, is not taken care of because of what just happened with James Franklin, right? Like, if you're Clark Lee, you pretty much have this Vanderbilt job for as long as you want now because of how successful you've made it. Not only did they go 10-2 this year and have been ranked the last 2 years, they just flipped the number one recruit in the class of 2026, five-star quarterback from Georgia to Vanderbilt. He is royalty there. All of that is not going to be good enough at Penn State. And that's okay. It's good to have a high standard, but you can't have that high of a standard, treat people who don't meet that standard the way you have, but then expect that you can go offer your job to anybody and they're going to be incredibly grateful that you've considered them and they're going to take the job. It's not going to work that way. And on top of it, I don't think they're actually investing in their football team enough. They had conversations with Urban Meyer, and Urban Meyer said no because they weren't able to offer the NIL that he wanted to be able to use to acquire talent. You're Penn State and you're not able to like fork up the money to be able to compete with the NIL budgets of Ohio State, for example, who you're always trying to beat. No wonder you never beat them. Like that's just like there's a reason that the Colorado Rockies are never better than the Los Angeles Dodgers because the Los Angeles
Mhm.
Dodgers are willing to spend more to get better players and the Colorado Rockies aren't. Like
Mhm.
that's just really basic understanding of how this thing works. And so I
Right.
think I think all of that together is the reason that Penn State was in the situation that it was in. Like they value themselves too much. They don't have a realistic like recognition of where they sort of fall in the pecking order of college football. And on top of that, James Franklin just got you to the Final Four, to the national semifinals,
Mhm.
and it wasn't good enough, and you fired him.
Mhm.
Like, who wants that pressure? Also, you know.
Right. And that's what I was talking with you a month or two about when James Franklin originally got fired, when we were talking about potential head coaching fits. And I brought up the point to you. I was like, man, you know what I think would actually be good for Penn State if they sucked for a while and then were able to rebuild from sucking. Because right now I think Matt Campbell's a good head coach. But when you're thinking about the moment they fired James Franklin, it wasn't about James Franklin not being a good head coach. It was trying to unlock that ceiling that James Franklin didn't seem to be able to have, even though Penn State as the school hasn't been able to have that for decades. But for that matter, I think that Matt Campbell, as you said, kind of bails out Penn State a little bit because when we're talking about how bad of a situation they were in with this head coaching search, they could have ended up with a far worse situation than this. And Matt Campbell should be able to at least stabilize them, even though he doesn't seem like he would be the likely culprit of unlocking the ceiling that they want to have. He's very likely not going to drop the floor like I think they could have had with the mess that could have happened out of this.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I mean, I think Penn State, you're now in a position, to sort of change the topic from Penn State, to Matt Campbell. Matt Campbell is
Mhm.
a great hire. If they had ended up hiring Matt Campbell and all of
Mhm.
this had happened 3 weeks ago, we're
Yep.
not talking about this the same way. We're talking about how great of a hire it is. Matt Campbell's a great head coach. You're going to have great success with him. He's a good recruiter. He has a great staff that he'll probably bring a lot over from, and all of that. The problem is the way this all played out. The problem is that it happened days after National Signing Day. The problem is that Penn State has a worse rated recruiting class than the likes of Harvard and Yale
Mhm.
because of the way that you drew this out. That's why this is talked about the way it is. If you just look at Penn State hired Matt Campbell to be their next head coach, it's a great hire. Great decision. Even if you look at it compared to James Franklin, yeah, James Franklin had been there a while. Maybe he'd sort of reached a plateau. At least with Matt Campbell, you get something new, something fresh. See if he can sort of punch through that glass ceiling and get above there. That's
Mhm.
the Matt Campbell part of it. But when you look at the whole thing, it's like Penn State is lucky that they have Matt Campbell now as their head coach.
Mhm.
All right.
Right.
This is going to be a long episode, but that's okay because college football is awesome and we still have a lot to talk about, including the conference championships. This weekend is conference championship weekend. Nick, you had said that you just had some thoughts about conference championship weekend in general, as do I.
Mhm.
And so before we get into actually looking at, there's 6 games that we're going to look at because all 6 of them are consequential to the college football playoff in some way. Before we get into looking at those, let's just talk about the conference championship weekend in general. Nick, what are some of the things that you're thinking going into this weekend?
So what I'm thinking about, I'm thinking Indiana, Ohio State, a 1 versus 2 matchup should be a marquee matchup, should be a massive game on the level of a national championship where Ohio State, incumbent national championship winners from last year, have what seems like an even better team. Their defense is incredible. And Indiana's on this historic run from last year to this year of the best football Indiana as a program's ever played. They've been incredible. Fernando Mendoza's been great. And for it being a 1 versus 2 matchup and a Big Ten championship, I kind of find it disappointing that the stakes just don't seem very high to me. Or do both teams want to win? Sure. But I think both teams certified easily are going to be in the playoffs by far. And I think both teams, Like, I just don't know what the motivation is necessarily for these teams. And it's a freaking championship game. It's a Big Ten championship. And the whole championship game system, especially with this particular matchup, with the rankings that the teams have right now, the fact that we are having big games down the stretch here that should be big swing games of who gets in, who gets out, seeding, those types of things, and it just doesn't feel like it has the weight that it should, is kind of disappointing for me. Because when I see games like this, I want it to be they're fighting to get a bye. They're fighting to get seeding because these other terrifying teams. They're fighting to make it in, to stay alive. And it doesn't seem like that pressure necessarily is there, even though for seeding it does matter. But in actual reality, like, I don't think either team is going to be playing with the motivation that you would want out of a 1-versus-2 matchup. And that's kind of disappointing to me. I want that. And these are two incredible teams that have played great football this year. Ohio State beating Texas, Indiana going on the road beating Oregon. These are two really good football teams, and we want to see high-level football in a big spot. And it doesn't seem like this necessarily will be the biggest spot either of these teams are going to be in, and it's a championship game. So that just makes me kind of sad here.
Yeah, I think everyone was mad and upset about the way that conference champions were given the automatic bye last year in the first year of the 12-team playoff. That said, I actually think that was the right call because, like you said, like, here's the thing. As long as Indiana doesn't get blown out by 5 touchdowns, they're still going to be in the top 4. Like,
Right.
And same thing with Ohio State, right? You look at the SEC championship game this week. I find it hard to believe if Alabama wins that they don't move up into the top 4. And I also find it hard to believe if Alabama wins that Georgia also doesn't leave the top 4. And so at that point, it's like, well, then yeah, like what point what point do we have in playing this game? Um, Even further talking about conference championship weekend in general, right? The fear last year was Clemson beats SMU and the committee isn't going to let SMU stay in the college football playoff. They did the right thing and did leave them in. That said, looking at some of these other ones, specifically the Big 12 championship, um, Texas Tech, BYU. Right now, technically, BYU isn't in. They're one of the first 4 out because there needs to be a conference champion that needs to get in. But hypothetically, let's say BYU's at 10 right now instead of 11. They lose to Texas Tech. They likely fall out of the playoff. And it's like, what are we doing, right? Like, this is you are given an opportunity. I think if you are within the playoff, after the rankings that come out before the conference championship game, unless you get blown out, like blown out, like we're talking Texas Tech beats BYU by 3 touchdowns, blown out.
Mm-hmm.
This should only be a way for you to improve your position, not lose your position. And I think that we are. I think we are very close to conferences just eliminating their championship game altogether. Imagine if Alabama loses to Georgia, and Alabama falls out of the top 12. What reason does the SEC have to even have the SEC championship game next year? Like, especially because buys don't go to conference champions anymore. I think they made the mistake of eliminating that. I think they needed to bring that back. I think that was really important because again, it gave these games meaning. It meant that, hey, Indiana, if you lose to Ohio State, even though we have you ranked as the number 2 team in the country, if you lose, at best, you're going to be 5, and you're going to be playing that first weekend. And sure, you're going to be playing at home against James Madison or North Texas, and you're going to be a 24-point favorite, but still, that is a game that you have to play in instead of getting to sit and rest and get healthy. And so, yeah, I think we are we're almost at the point that this weekend becomes obsolete.
Right. And you look at last year, like I was looking at last year's Big Ten championship. You have Penn State and then you have Oregon, and that was a close game. But the thing is, Ohio State, the eventual national champion, wasn't playing in the Big Ten championship. And it was basically a no loss scenario. Like they were just chilling there, made the playoffs, not playing in the championship game, then went on a run and destroyed everybody. And that sort of situation, I feel like, is another data point for why it is that the championship games are kind of useless. Where if the eventual national champion doesn't play a championship game and then proceeds to smoke the teams that were in their championship game, what are we doing? Like, what's the point? We're playing these championship games for what?
Yeah.
Like, if the whole point of this is to crown a national champion, to know who the best team and the whole thing is, and the best team doesn't even play in the game that's supposed to mean something for the Big Ten, it just feels like that Big Ten championship is just like pompous, trying to show off, being like, oh, look who won the Big Ten championship. And how do you think Oregon feels last year? They're like, we're the Big Ten champion, and then proceeded to get smoked by Ohio State. What do you think that does sitting in their trophy case being a Big Ten champion? That means nothing to them. Like
Yeah.
it should mean something if we're going to play these big games and try and make them big. But right now, in the situation we're in with how the playoffs are built, it just isn't. Like these are meaningless trophies there.
Yeah. I think they need to reassess making only conference champions getting the first round bye. Like, because then here's the benefit to playing it. One, you get that first round bye. Two,
Mhm.
if you're one of those teams that isn't playing that weekend, it's like, well, that sucks for you. Sure,
Mhm.
you don't have an opportunity to lose and fall out of it, but guess what? You have to play in 2 weeks.
Mhm.
And you might have to play against a team that did just play this weekend, just barely came up short, and is hot and is angry because they just barely came up short, and
Mhm.
they're fresh, right? Like, I think there's serious concern about the value of conference championships at this point, because the playoff is so big, because all of the bowl games, the New Year's Six bowl games, are part of the playoff now. Like, the Rose Bowl used to be the Big Ten champion versus the Pac-12 champion.
Mhm.
And even if you weren't in the playoff, if back in the 14 playoff, if it was one of the years that the 14 or that the playoff was not using the Rose Bowl as one of their semifinal games,
Mhm.
then you got to play in a very prestigious bowl game if you were the Pac-12 champion or the Big Ten champion and you didn't make the playoff, right? That was the case in that 2016 year we talked about earlier with Penn State. Penn State played USC. Both of them were their conference champions. They played each other in the Rose Bowl. It is one of the most iconic Rose Bowls in the history of probably the most prestigious bowl game in college football. So there was still value there, right? Like, winning your conference championship, even if you didn't make the playoff, was the difference between playing in the Rose Bowl or playing in the Holiday Bowl, right? But now the college football playoff came in and took all of the prestigious bowl games. So all the ones that are left are like the Duke's Mayo Bowl and the Fenway Bowl and the Pop Tart Bowl that don't mean anything. On
Yeah.
top of that, you also then have these, like, teams that are in the playoff and don't aren't playing this weekend, and so they don't need to risk losing and dropping out of the playoff.
Mhm.
BYU head coach Kalani Sataki said earlier this week, and I thought it was a very good point, that
Mhm.
teams that are in, or teams that are competing for a playoff spot that are not playing in a conference championship game, should still have to play that 13th game. And
Mhm.
I think it's true, because BYU and Kalani Sitake right now, they're in a position where if they
Mhm.
win, yes, they get in. If they lose, they have no chance of getting in. Even
Mhm.
if they were to play Texas Tech really close, right? Say they lose to Texas Tech 38-35, and then
Mhm.
you have a team like Notre Dame, who is 10-2 right now, is not playing this week because they're not in a conference. The only
Mhm.
two really good teams that they played against this year, they lost to. There's a
Mhm.
chance that even though BYU is going to give a top four team in the country that close of a game, they're going to
Mhm.
fall out of the playoff, and Notre Dame is still in. When, say, they had to schedule a game against Vanderbilt and Vanderbilt wins, well, guess what? Notre Dame should fall out, and BYU should be taking their place. So yeah, the conference championship thing is weird. Um,
Mhm.
because of what the playoff has done and the decisions the college football playoff has made.
Mhm. And I'm all for. I want to double down on what the BYU head coach said specifically with regards to playing a 13th game. I think it will be so awesome because of the pressure situations and the high leverage teams that we would see in matchups like that. Think about teams like Oklahoma that they're not playing this weekend, Texas A&M. If Texas A&M had to play Oklahoma this weekend, and they were fighting for a playoff spot. Like those are two highly seeded teams right now in the rankings. But if they had to play each other and we go, wait a second. So Texas A&M we think's a good team, they have good wins. Oklahoma we think's a good team, they have good wins. But they just played against each other and then we get a head to head and against a good team and in a high leverage like winner get in at large kind of thing. I would feel so much more confident about who's good and who's not. And that's
Right.
the whole reason that we play this so that we put the best teams in and they have to win to get in. The fact that neither of those teams are playing this weekend and can just sit back on their laurels and probably make the playoffs anyway, it seems like they're assured to do that. That's kind of just ridiculous to me that teams don't have to play and are going to make the playoffs just chilling at home this weekend. Like, that's just not great scheduling or structure to me at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. We'll talk more about the college football playoff as we get through some of these conference championship games specifically because there are some playoff implications depending on who wins these. Nick, you started off talking about the Big Ten championship game. We talked a good bit about that. So let's make our picks for that one. Again,
Mhm.
Ohio State 12-0, ranked number one by the College Football Playoff Committee. Indiana 12-0, ranked number two by the College Football Playoff Committee. I think Indiana's going to win this game.
Mhm.
I think Ohio State has had just outside of that Texas game, they've just had such an easy run.
Mhm.
Even like let's be honest, Michigan is not a good team, right? They beat Michigan last week. That's great. Michigan, the good teams that they played against, USC and Oklahoma, they lost to both of them. They don't have a passing game, right? Take that compared to Indiana with Fernando Mendoza. I think I think that Ohio State is going to be caught off guard a little bit, and Indiana is going to be able to pull it off. Now, I also think that even if that happens, I still like Ohio State more than Indiana to win the whole thing, even if Indiana beats Ohio State this week, because Ohio State's been there before. Ohio State's experienced. It took them getting punched in the mouth by Michigan last year and missing the Big Ten championship game to like recenter themselves to go on their run that they did. And so I think Indiana's going to win this game, but I think it's actually going to be better off for Ohio State by losing to Indiana this week because it'll sort of get them in check with, oh yeah, like we aren't unstoppable.
Mhm. I like that. I think it's a good pick. I would pick similarly. The only pause that I have, I pick Indiana here too. But the only pause that I'm feeling is that Ohio State hasn't won the Big Ten since 2020. It's been multiple years now since Ohio State won the Big Ten. Do you think they have much motivation there to try and win this game to be able to get that they haven't had in basically every player who's there hasn't won the Big Ten when now they have a national champion last year or championship last year? They beat Michigan this year. Do you think it's just another box that they want to check? Do you think they have that motivation? Or do you think that it is a we lose this game and then go on a run and smoke everybody after this kind of situation?
I'm not sure. And here's why I'm not sure. Because they did not treat beating Michigan last week as their Super Bowl, which they shouldn't have. They were focused on that, and they're
Mhm.
so focused on the prize of winning it all that I
Mhm.
wonder if that actually like it will actually be to their deficit in this game.
Mhm.
Um because of that. Because like we were just talking about, the Big Ten championship game doesn't carry any weight outside of do you want to be the one seed or the two seed, you
Mhm.
know? Um which, you know, yes, the one seed it's more favorable because in round two they're going to play the 8 seed, and then in round three they're going to play the 4 seed. You know, so like in theory, if all of the higher seeds win their games, right? So like yes, it is. Of course, it's more favorable to be the one seed, but again, like if they lose this, they don't have that much harder of a path. If they lose, and not saying all of this to say that, you know, the players are thinking this and because of that they don't care and they're like not gonna play their starters because they feel like they can take the game off and whatever. Like no, but just I think there's a chance instead of it, they're so clearly on the prize, like eyes on the prize, that they are so focused on everything that is in the way of that, that they might be so focused on the prize, which is college football playoff national champion, that they're just some lapses that they have in the Big Ten championship game, because the Big Ten championship game is just a stepping stone
Mhm.
for them on their way to their actual prize, and not just a stepping stone, it's more like a stone that they could skip over because again they've already done well enough, they don't need it to get into the playoffs and they don't
Mhm.
need it to be a top 4 seed. So yeah, yeah, I think we haven't seen Ohio State's A game yet this year.
Mhm.
um and I think that there's because we haven't, there's a chance that we don't see it tomorrow night. And if we don't, I think Indiana is very ready and willing to jump on that.
Yeah, I get you there. The only other thing is, like, obviously, like I said, they haven't won a Big Ten championship in a number of years. But the other thing is, I think winning this Big Ten championship puts them in another stratosphere where
Mhm.
they're in the catbird seat to winning back-to-back national champions, being undefeated, winning the second one if they can go on a run here and just win everything. And I don't even know that they need to go on a run because they're that talented. Their defense is that good. Jeremiah Smith and the offense are incredible. Like, I think that if they're able to check this box of a Big Ten champion, to be able to say undefeated, back to back, won it all. Like, I think that that potentially puts them in an all time stratosphere. Where I
Mhm.
think that if they go back to back but lose a Big Ten championship, like maybe it's a blemish, but I think that as a resume thing, when we're looking at them as an all time team, and they look like an all time team, would be an awesome lens to be viewing them through.
For sure, absolutely. All right, let's talk about the SEC championship. Alabama is playing Georgia. They played earlier this year, in Athens, I believe. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that game happened at Georgia.
Mhm.
Alabama won it. Um, Kalen DeBoer, as a head coach, he has never lost to Dan Lanning, Steve Sarkisian, or Kirby Smart. For all the
Mhm.
things that you want to say about what things looked like for Alabama in his first year, you can at least look at that and be impressed by that.
Mhm.
And I have no reason to believe that this time is going to be the time that he loses that streak. I've got Alabama winning this game. I think, unfortunately, it'll put us in the terrible, horrendous place of we're going to have two Big Ten and two SEC teams in the top 4 spots with buys. It's going to suck, but I think that's what we're going to see.
hmm I'm there with you. I completely agree. I just think that I think Georgia's potentially a little overrated this year. I just think that this Georgia team, compared to the back to back national championship Georgia teams, it's a far cry. I just think Alabama has a couple of more difference makers, better quarterback play, better receiving play. I just think Alabama potentially is the better football team, straight up. And they already beat them this year. So I'm going Alabama as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, it's tough. I want to say that I think this is going to be really interesting and a really fun watch. But again, it's like both these teams are in, you know, like,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, you know, like it's different than, you know, in college basketball, for example, right? The when you have those conference championship games, if you win, you are automatically in, and the other team is not automatically in. They probably are in. If you lose that game, you're going to have a worse seed, right? Like those sort of things are significant. In this, if Alabama loses, they'll be the 10 seed and they'll travel to the 7, who right now I think is Ole Miss, maybe. Ole Miss might be 6. You know, like Ole Miss, A&M, maybe. I think it's A&M, right? They'll travel to A&M. Like yeah. So it sucks. Okay, now we start getting into some interesting stuff. So I think first we need to talk about the position that Notre Dame is in the college football playoff rankings right now.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the position that Notre Dame is in. Right now, Notre Dame is the last team in. They're number 10. The reason that they're the last team in, even though it's a 12-team playoff, is because the 5 highest ranked conference champions have to get into the college football playoff. Okay? Let me rephrase that. Or restate that. The top 5 highest ranked conference champions. That does not guarantee the 4 Power 4 conference champions and one group of 5 conference champion. The top 5 ranked conference champions. Okay? So, here are the ways that Notre Dame can fall out. Right now, BYU is not in the field. Okay? BYU upsets Texas Tech. Texas Tech certainly is not dropping out of the field. BYU has to get in. Notre Dame falls out. That's one way. BYU loses. In theory, that puts Notre Dame and Miami right next to each other in the rankings because BYU is the only thing separating those two. And then you look and you're like, okay, that head to head game, I mean, come on now. They're right next to each other. We can't just ignore that anymore. Third thing, if Duke wins the ACC championship game, if Duke beats Virginia, here's the doomsday situation, okay? If Duke beats Virginia, then that means the top 5 rated conference champions are the SEC champion, the Big Ten champion, the Big 12 champion, the American Athletic Conference champion, and the likely Sun Belt champion, James Madison. Which means if Duke wins, then you are looking at a place where the college football playoff is going to not have a Power 4 conference represented. Now, even though I think that Miami does deserve to be in over Notre Dame, I think Notre Dame is a better team than Miami, but I think Miami, based on the criteria of what you need to do to get into the college football playoff, is more deserving than Notre Dame. In that doomsday scenario where Duke wins the ACC championship game, do you really think that the college football playoff committee is going to completely leave out an entire power conference in favor of Notre Dame? I think there's a chance that Notre Dame falls out because of that, let alone the head to head, but because it's like we have to put Miami in, otherwise we don't have a Power 4 team in there, which I'm not saying is right. I think it is. I think it makes the end result right. I think that being the reason is not right. But if you're Notre Dame right now, you cannot be sitting where you are just completely like, yeah, we're good, because you aren't.
Right. And I think what you're saying in all actuality is all roads end to either Notre Dame being out because somebody jumps them or Notre Dame being out because they run up against Miami directly and lost head to head. It's just a fancy way of saying it all ends with that. And so I think that Notre Dame, as we were talking about before, if they were playing a game this week against a team that mattered because they aren't playing in a conference championship game, I think it should either lead to they should be in a conference or it should be they should be playing a game this week because they're conference championship games like we were talking about before. And all the other teams that should be fighting for these spots should be playing too. Because I think that if Notre Dame's on the edge and Miami's on the edge, what if they played again right now? Like they're both on that edge. If they played right now and Notre Dame dominated Miami, I think they would have a shot to change their fate. But I think, as you were
1,000%.
saying, their fate's basically sealed.
Yeah. So yeah, it's really weird. I think we'll get to these other 4 games that we're gonna do predictions for. But here's the thing that is just a macro in general thing with the college football playoff that I think needs to be said. There will always, no matter how big this playoff gets, if they expand it to 64 teams, there are going to be arguments that team number 65 got screwed, right?
Mhm.
It's at 12 teams. There's arguments about, teams 13, 14, and 15 getting screwed. At 4 teams, there was
Mhm.
arguments about teams getting screwed. In my opinion, the only time that there was a legitimate argument for a team getting screwed was when Florida, undefeated ACC champion Florida State, got left out of the
Mhm.
college football playoff because
Mhm.
there was literally nothing more that that team could have done. That said,
Mhm.
if Notre Dame doesn't get in, if Miami doesn't get in, Texas and Vanderbilt, there's no shot for them to get in. All of these teams, I want to make it loud and clear. You are not getting screwed. You could have won more games. Period. If Miami
Mhm.
beats SMU or Louisville, they're in. If Notre Dame beats Miami, this isn't a conversation. If Vanderbilt beats Texas, then they're in. If Texas doesn't lose to a 4-win Florida team, then they're probably in because of the win over Texas A&M. But the
Mhm.
fact is, all of those teams have blemishes, and because of
Mhm.
that, you are not getting into the playoff. Plain and simple, right? Like, because
Mhm.
you messed up. You had opportunities. Every single team going into the college football season controls their own destiny when it comes to making the college football playoff because you can always win every game and then you get in, or win
Mhm.
enough games that you can compete for your conference championship, win that game, and get in. Texas
Mhm.
is not being screwed. You know, Vanderbilt is not being screwed.
Mhm.
Notre Dame or Miami, they're not being screwed. There are other teams. BYU is not being screwed. They could have beaten Texas Tech the first time they played, and then they would be in Texas Tech's position, and Texas Tech would be in theirs, right? Like, that's how the game works, right? You play games, you win
Mhm.
them, you get rewarded, you lose them, you get punished. Okay? So, can we stop with this nonsense that we need to expand the college football playoff again to 16 teams? Can we
Mhm.
stop with this nonsense that there are teams that are getting completely hosed and completely screwed out of playing in the college football playoff when in reality, you had all of these opportunities to win games. If you win
Mhm.
one more, then this isn't a conversation.
Mhm.
Like if Vanderbilt was 11-1 and they had beaten Texas, then guess what? We don't need to have the argument like why is Notre Dame and Miami ahead of them? Because they wouldn't be. Because Vanderbilt would be up at spot like 8 right now at 11-1. Like that's that's the game. Win more games and you don't need to have this issue, right? We don't need to add more teams to the playoff so that teams that lose more games can get in because they deserve it. Because you don't deserve it because you didn't win your games. Like you can prove that you deserve it by winning your games.
Right, right. We're not leaving any supermodels off the runway. At least the people who are leaving out are flawed, and we know it anyway. We're not leaving out supermodels like that Florida team being undefeated and a championship team. That team doesn't exist as far as a team that's going to miss the playoffs now. They
Right.
might have a lower seed than they would want now, but they're still making the dance. And even without their quarterback, they could still do a little bit of damage, probably eventually lose, but they still got a spot. So
Right. Yeah. All right. Big 12 championship, Texas Tech, BYU. Texas Tech won the prior meeting between these two. It
mhm,
was in Lubbock, Texas, and they won 29-7. Um,
mhm,
if you're on the BYU side of this, you're saying like, well, hey, like, that game, we had some turnovers, we're able to clean that up. This game was actually could have been way closer than it is. If you're on the
mhm,
Texas Tech side of things, you're looking at Texas Tech settled for 5 field goals. Like
mhm,
they could have won this game 42-7. Like that's the give and take there. I do have Texas Tech winning this game. I really appreciate the BYU story. They had a veteran quarterback that they had to kick out of school. And they brought in this true freshman who has lit it up and has been great there. I appreciate that, the BYU, even though they're in the Big 12, I do think that they are a good team in college football. Um, But that said, like I just think Texas Tech is going to be better.
Yep, I'm there with you as well. I think that when we're looking at these teams head to head, Texas Tech has already beaten them, and they beat them in sound fashion. And I don't think BYU has any wins that I can at least point to say, hey, are you really a team of the caliber of the number of wins that you've gotten? And Texas Tech, I think, has just looked better this year and has beat BYU, and BYU is a quality win. And that's not
Yeah,
to say that BYU is a bad football team, but Texas Tech is a certified good football team, and there's nothing certifying BYU right now on their resume.
for sure. All right. The American Athletic Conference. Tulane is playing North Texas. Again, we're mentioning this because whoever wins this game will for sure be in the college football playoff. Tulane is ranked number 21 and North Texas is ranked number 24 or vice versa, something around there. So the winner of this one's making the college football playoff. Interesting about this game, both of these teams' head coaches have accepted new jobs. North Texas's head coach. He's going to be the Oklahoma State head coach, and John Summerall from Tulane is going to take the Florida job. So this is an interesting one because yeah, the winner win and you're into the college football playoff with this game. Nick, who do you like in this one?
All right, Jack. I got North Texas. I just think their offense has been more explosive, and I think that I can trust their offense more against the defense that I don't think Tulane's defense is going to be as well schemed with Summerall gone. And I just think that North Texas right now is in a position with a little bit more energy in this spot than Tulane. So I'm going to go North Texas here.
Yeah, I really like North Texas. I am leaning Tulane. I'm leaning Tulane because of the experience there. John Summerall having experience coaching in big games. On top of that, Tulane's quarterback is BYU's quarterback from last year that BYU had to kick off the team. And he's played in some big games. The Big 12 race last year was really interesting. There were like four teams that were in it until the very end, and then BYU went and played Colorado in the Alamo Bowl and destroyed them there. So like there's just a lot of experience on the Tulane side that I'm not seeing on the North Texas side. They've got a freshman quarterback and freshman running back who are studs and are phenoms and will probably follow their head coach to Oklahoma State and be incredibly successful there next year. But I'm leaning experience in this one, and the
Mhm.
experience goes to Tulane. So they're going to be my pick for this one. Um, Next, our second to last one, just touching on it briefly, is the Sun Belt. James Madison is playing against a 10-2 Troy. I think we can really quickly we'll both agree that James Madison is who we have in this game. But it's worth mentioning because of the sort of doomsday scenario that we talked about with the ACC championship. And so talking about the ACC championship, we have Virginia playing Duke. Now, the weird thing about this, Duke is 7-5. They went 1-3 in the non-conference. Okay, they went 1-3 in the non-conference. Honestly, people are gonna look at this and be like, "Oh, like Duke is so bad." Blah blah blah. They're only 7-5, and they're also thinking about Texas isn't getting in because of their loss to Ohio State, and so what's the purpose of scheduling premier non-conference games? To that, I say, if you look at Duke, who you look at them, they went 1-3 in the non-conference. They're competing for a conference championship and have not sniffed the top 25 this year. So they're more of a reason to be like, don't schedule good non-conference opponents. But also, I think that just in general is total crap. So,
Mhm.
um, I think Duke is going to win this game, and I
Cool.
don't just think that because I'm rooting for the chaos, though I am, but I think they are because many times this year Virginia has played with their food. I
Mhm.
watched Virginia play Cal early in November. Cal, not a great team. And yeah, and Virginia just messed around and let Cal stay in the game.
Mhm.
I think Duke is too good of a team. Darian Mensah is a really good quarterback. They have an incredible defense, Manny Diaz led defense.
Mhm.
And so I really think that Duke is actually going to win this game, which will, of course, put lots of things into really, really weird situations. But I do have Duke beating Virginia in the ACC championship.
Mhm. I actually agree with you. I actually have Duke as well winning the ACC championship. I just think that the game script is going to lean more into Duke and Duke's ability to score with more volume. I think that Virginia might kind of struggle with figuring out how to deal with Duke. And I just think the spot that they're in, even though Virginia has already beat Duke this year, I think that Duke's just in a good position to flip the script on them.
Cool. All right. Well, then in that case, I think the only different one we have is you have North Texas instead of Tulane. Otherwise, we're sort of all in the same boat there. So,
Mhm.
last thing before we end this long college football episode is I saw this in a like a sports fans Facebook page that I'm on. Um, I saw this question posed, and I think it's a really good one. And so I wanted to ask you it, and it's related to the college football playoff ranking criteria. Okay, and there are four things that I want you to place in order of most important to least important when it comes to how the college football playoff committee ranks teams. Okay. And these are the four things. Number one is good wins. Number two is bad losses. Number three is strength of schedule. And number four is record. Nick, what order would you put those in terms of most important to least important?
Mhm. So I was pondering this for a good stretch, and to me, it actually seemed like a pretty clear straight line for me as far as top to bottom. Starting from the bottom, I think bad losses. I just think that college football, it can be a grind. The season can feel long, especially with it starting early in the late summer. And then you have a bunch of bye weeks intermixed where the rest versus rust factor, I feel like, really gets to be something during the season. And I just think there can be so much of a letting your foot off the gas if you're a good team against bad teams, where I don't think that indicates that you're not a good team. And I think that there is some coaching involved in that as far as having energy and playing professionally every week. But I don't really blame teams for losing on a random off week against what could be potentially other good teams. So at the bottom, I would put bad losses, where bad losses just kind of happen sometimes. But the thing is, you'll see great teams have bad losses on occasion here and there too. And so I don't really value them as massive knocks. Next, above that, I'll put strength of schedule. I just think that strength of schedule matters. But the thing is, I think that we're inching closer and closer to having more and more competitive games for every team all across college football. I just think that the differential in strength of schedule is shrinking. And so I feel like back in the day, you think of Alabama playing McNeese State or other random mining schools and stuff. And you're seeing less and less of that. That obviously hasn't gone away. But I think the gap in strength of schedule has been closing. And so I don't really value that quite as much, even though there are teams at the top that play really difficult strength of schedules. And they do rack up some losses because their schedule is so difficult. And I do value if your schedule's been hard. But I do think that because everybody are playing these football games, the ability to win them matters more to me. Above that, I'll put good wins because I think that good wins are so incredibly valuable, specifically against ranked teams or conference teams that are good. I just think that good wins I value a lot because they look real to me. Where when we're talking about Alabama playing McNeese State or not real football game, like I was talking to you about before, where 9 times out of 10 or even 99 times out of 100, those games don't look like what football looks like to us. It looks like one team rushing for 300 yards and passing it all over the place, and there being 4 turnovers. Like it just doesn't feel like a real football game. And so I think big wins, as far as big, meaningful wins, are really valuable in this sport where Oklahoma beating Alabama is a very, very, very valuable win because who has a better win than that in college football? There are some, but it's not many. And so those big wins, I think, are massively valuable, even if you haven't won all of your games. And then above that, I'll put record. I just think that the ability to win and that level of professionality and being able to show up day after day after day and work the process and win against whatever team is put in front of you. That's when you see teams like the 2019 LSU team that, although their strength of schedule was ridiculous, their ability to go undefeated and look ridiculous, just destroying other teams, was so impressive considering all the circumstances. But how would we view that team if they, going into it, were 10-2 or something like that? Like, I don't think we would value them in terms of the lore and legend of what that team was without both the strength of schedule, but also how dominant and how many wins they were able to rack up against that. And so that's why I think record into quality wins, because I think quality wins being attached to your record matters. But I think just winning all your games is incredibly valuable. And then strength of schedule, because strength of schedule really to me means having really good wins, and then bad losses there at the bottom for me.
So we have record in the same place, and that's it. Um, so I agree with you about record. And I think it's more than just the teams that are undefeated. Like also like
Mhm.
okay, you know what? I don't care that it's, the ACC or the Big 12. I think that Texas Tech being 11-1 is more valuable than Texas being 9-3 because they won more games. Everybody
Mm,
plays the same number of games and you won more games, okay?
mm,
Of course then when we start comparing like, Texas to say, James Madison, it's like okay, well now that's a little different, when we look at it that way. But still, right? Like,
mhm,
in general record number 1. Number
yes.
2, I have bad losses. Now,
Mm,
I think it's important that we understand what bad losses are, okay? If you lose to a team that ends the season with a winning record and you lose
mm,
to them on the road and it's a close game, that's not a
mm,
bad loss to me. If you lose to a team that is a bad team, that is a
mm,
bad loss. Texas
mm,
losing to Florida is a bad loss, right?
mm,
Like, Vanderbilt losing to Alabama is not a bad loss. It's just a loss, right? Because they lost to Alabama, right? So,
mm,
like, we can't just call all losses bad losses, right? Like, I see, I see like when we're comparing resumes, it's like, worst loss, and it'll be like for BYU, it says Texas Tech. It's like, okay, well, don't even say that. Just say the only team they lost to is Texas Tech, right? Like, that's not a bad loss, obviously.
I think that
But the
those can be
reason,
bad losses if you get dominated, though. Like that game wasn't the level of domination that I call dominated. But if BYU lost to Texas Tech 50-15, like that to me is a bad loss, even if it's against a really good team. Like to me, getting dominated when you're supposed to be in a similar tier to me.
yeah, but even still, I think what makes something a bad loss is still subjective. But the reason that I put that at number 2 is
Mm-hmm.
because and it also sort of bleeds into why I have good wins at number 3,
Mm-hmm.
because teams that are not the best teams can pull
Mm-hmm.
off upsets. That happens. That happens in all sports, all levels of sports. In the NFL this last week, the Panthers just beat the Rams, right? Like that's that's the way that goes, right? And so it works both ways of like bad losses. It's like, well, you don't want teams that have bad losses because guess what? If you're like, oh, well, Texas just had a bad game, there against Florida. It's like, okay, well, imagine if they have a bad game against Alabama in the first round of the playoffs. They're going to lose if they play that same level, they're going to lose by 35 points. Like, do we really want that? Vice versa, on the flip side of the coin, good wins, a team that's say 8-4 but has a win against a team that's like top 10 in the country, that should not warrant them being considered oh well, you're a good team that we should see if we should put you in the college football playoff. I mean, like last year, Syracuse went 9-3. They beat Miami. They also beat UNLV and they beat Georgia Tech. They had three ranked wins, and the really good win, of course, was against number 8 ranked Miami at the end of the season. I was
Mhm.
never arguing that Syracuse deserved to be considered for the college football playoff, right? Even though having that win against Miami was a better win than say Indiana had, right? Like that, like that's we have to put that in scope. And so I think if we're using bad losses and good wins to compare teams with the same record, okay. But if we're trying to say a team that's 9-3 and a team that's 11-1, we're comparing their good losses or their bad losses and their good wins. It's like, whoa, 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 hold on. They're far enough apart that that shouldn't be the reason that we're drawing them close together. And then the last thing that I have is I have strength of schedule. Strength of schedule is a stupid metric. It's a stupid metric. I do
Mhm.
not care. I do not care if you play the hardest schedule in college football. If you don't win the games, it doesn't matter. Why are we rewarding teams for playing against good teams but not beating them
Mhm.
instead of rewarding strength of record, which takes into account the strength of schedule, but winning those games, right? Strength of record means way more to me than strength of schedule. Strength of schedule is a stupid stat, right? Strength of schedule is a stupid stat because you look at teams that went like 5-7, like Mississippi State, right? It's like, well, look how high their strength of schedule is. It's like, yeah,
Mhm.
and they lost 7 of those games. Like, why? Like, that shouldn't be a reason that we're using to like say that like, oh well, they should be in, right? Again, if we have two teams that are 10-2 and we look at their strength of schedule, okay, that can be used there to put
Mhm.
one over the other. But strength of
Mhm.
schedule to compare a 9-3 team to an 11-1 team, I think is just totally ridiculous.
I think it's also a very raw stat. Like I'll just bring that into account where like if you look at NBA basketball, field goal percentage is a very raw stat in terms of Steph Curry has a lower field goal percentage than DeAndre Jordan. But the thing is, the field goal percentage difference is so different because the quality of shots and the value of those shots and what they do for the offense. But I think, like you're saying, strength of schedule is just very raw, where it's just like, how good are the teams you're playing against? But that doesn't really matter when it comes to how did you do against them? How many
Right.
of those teams did you actually beat? What did it look like on the field? What did the turnover margin look like? And so I think the value actually comes when you dive in deeper than just strength of schedule, like you're saying, where it's just a very raw number that doesn't really mean much outside of you played good teams. Wisconsin played a bunch of good teams this year. It does not mean they're good. They fired their head coach. They are not a good football team. But they also played a bunch of good football teams. Doesn't mean they're good. Just means they got their butt whooped a lot.
Yeah. You want to see this is the perfect example of this. I'm looking at this year's strength of schedule ratings.
Mm-hmm.
Number 1, Oregon at 11-1. Number 2, Indiana at 12-0.
Mm-hmm.
Indiana beat them,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is dumb. Number 5 is Florida at 4-8. Now, don't get me wrong. Florida had one of the hardest schedules I think college football has ever seen. But
Mm-hmm.
again, if we're using strength of schedule as a statistic for this, not
Mm-hmm.
only is it like, okay, well, we have teams higher than other teams that shouldn't matter, but also you have a team like uh Miami who's at 19 in strength of schedule, but also you have 6-6 Penn State, 5-7 Auburn,
Mm-hmm.
7-5 LSU, and 4-8 Florida above them. And it's like, so that's why they're down at 19 instead of top 15 with strength of schedule. And it shouldn't matter because those teams shouldn't be in the same breath as them. They aren't in the same breath as them. But we're saying, oh, well, Miami's strength of schedule is 19 and Notre Dame's is 10. It's like, yeah. And if all of those teams were gone, they would be separated by 4 spots. Like that's just silly, right? That's what it comes down to. Is it's just dumb. It doesn't make any sense. It's stupid. And the fact that it is being used to say that, like the fact that that is being brought up right now to say that Notre Dame, who has a strength of schedule of
Mm-hmm.
10, Miami has a strength of schedule of 19, and that's why Notre Dame should be higher than them. When again, Miami literally beat them. Notre Dame's strength of schedule is what it is because they played Miami. Like,
Mm-hmm.
hello, it just doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't do
Mhm.
It doesn't serve the purpose that it's designed to serve.
I get you there. I think that though, if you look in a microcosm at the rankings currently, not with regard to strength of schedule, but two of the other metrics being good wins and bad losses. If we're looking at teams like Vanderbilt and Texas, they obviously played against each other and Texas won. It was a close game, but Texas won. My thing about what the separator is for me between good wins and bad losses is you have a team like Vanderbilt that has a better record than Texas, and record obviously we both put as the highest. But the thing is, Vanderbilt doesn't have great wins, and Texas does, even though Texas has a way worse loss than Vanderbilt has. And so that to me is the main separator for me for why wins matter more than losses in terms of ranking these, specifically with regards to good teams. Because the thing is, I think that good wins are harder to come by than bad losses when it comes to really, really good wins. Like, I think that the ability to beat a Georgia, Alabama, Texas, Oklahoma is much more difficult than it is to lose against a Wisconsin or a UCLA or like these like those aren't obviously the worst losses because they're way worse losses than that, but I just feel like it's really difficult to get really good wins and it's a bit easier to get bad losses. And so I value the more difficult thing.
Yeah, no, that I understand that. But I also think you look at Texas and Vanderbilt and where they are, the reason that Texas is ahead of Vanderbilt is because Texas beat Vanderbilt, right? And
Mhm.
like head to head is not a metric or something that I wanted to use for this because that only applies in a few situations, right?
Right.
Like if we're comparing Miami to Alabama, we can't use head to head, right? The best that we can do is that Alabama lost to Florida State and Miami beat Florida State. So like okay, but that's not even head to head, right? So that's why I didn't include that there, and also record against you know common opponents isn't there because again that's a situation where they have a common opponent. Texas A&M and Miami. Well, no, they both played Notre Dame. Ole Miss and Miami have no common opponents, right? So
Mhm.
like that can't be a metric that's used there. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, I think the weird thing is just like it's always going to be comparing apples to oranges. It's always going to be. And because of that, things are going to be weird and things are going to be difficult. The problem is that there isn't a consistency about it that we can at least be like, hey, we know it like we will give the playoff committee all the credit in the world that it is hard to do what they are doing, right? You and I like a few weeks ago we tried to be like talking about it and we were like, well, we don't think this team is actually the like worthy of the rank number 5, but also who else would be in that place? And it's like, well, I guess not. So like we can't gripe with these rankings that much, right? But that said, there isn't consistency, which is what makes this so frustrating, right?
Mhm.
There has always been this consistency of how important head to head is. Head
Mhm.
to head does not matter with Miami Notre Dame. It does matter with Texas Vanderbilt. Make that
Mhm.
make sense, right? Like, so it's just that's the tough thing about it.
Mhm.
If there was a consistency to this, then okay, right? It's going to be hard. There's going to be things that are just like, man, we had to do something, right? And it just works out this way. But that said, like when it's like, okay, but even you're not even following your own protocol. It is like the college football playoff website as this is our protocol that we use, right? When you're not even following that, then it's like, what are we doing? And also when the people on the committee are athletic directors from these schools like and not previous coaches or players that like actually know what they're looking at
Mhm.
like what's the difference we especially this year there's been a lot of jokes about AP poll voters because they've done stupid stuff and like haven't paid close enough attention have submitted their ballot wrong stuff like that it's like mistakes happen right the AP poll voters have probably the same amount of football experience in terms of on the field and know what they're watching for when they watch film as some of these athletic directors on the committee.
Mhm.
And here we are. Like so that's just where it gets weird and frustrating.
Mhm. For sure.
All right, Nick. Well, we have gone for an hour and 40 minutes
Mm.
because we don't talk about college football enough, and so we have to squeeze all of this in. Um, be on the lookout for, of course, our typical NFL episode next week, and a college football episode as well, because we will be getting the bracket next Sunday, and so we'll be doing a bonus episode to look at that, break that down, see what matchups we like, which ones we don't, and also fill out brackets for how we think things are going to play out. So be on the lookout for that as well. If your team is playing in a conference championship game this week, good luck to them. Hopefully they play well enough, they do well enough, and they're able to get into the dance because of their performance this weekend. If not, and just enjoy the games, because who knows how much longer we're gonna have a conference championship weekend anyway. And on that very sad and somber note, we will see you next week. Thanks for watching and supporting us, and have a great weekend, everybody.